Welcome back to the Summoning Circle, where we dive into the minds behind the forgotten Runiverse game. I'm your host, Helen, and today I have summoned our creative director, Tanilo. Tanilo has been here since we started designing Forgotten Runiverse 3 years ago. He's seen it all, from the combat system design to the universe itself expanding, the story creation, all of it. So please welcome Tanilo. Hi, Tanilo.
Hi, Helen. Nice to be here. And eager to share a little bit of what's been going on behind the scenes.
Oh, well, you're a wealth of knowledge, so I hope you don't mind if I take you down a trip down memory lane today for the past 3 years of development that this game's been through.
Go ahead. Happy to answer
So we're better to
questions.
We're going 3 years ago with this first video that I've uncovered of our earliest development days. I'm wondering, in these early days, what were the design priorities? Did we always envision building a fully walkable open world, or did that idea evolve over time?
It was like a goal that we had set up for ourselves, but we didn't know if it was doable, especially taking into account that the game is web-based, right? Like the fact that it was a browser game made it like a technical challenge to be able to have like this seamless transition. And at the beginning, we wanted everything to happen like in this seamless transition. And eventually we realized that certain things couldn't happen that way, right? Like, for example, cities are instance areas that the players visit, dungeons as well, right? But like the plan was to have like this feeling of like you're truly traversing a huge world and like experiencing like in real time how you transition from one area to the other almost seamlessly. Right? Like I remember there was a discussion early on where we had built like the tile sets for 2 biomes, and I was insistent that we needed transitions, and the art team was like, I think we're good, but then when we placed it, it was like, okay, skipping from one to the next is a little funky, and we ended up like doing these beautiful transitions, terrain transitions, transitional props, and like there was a lot of like emergent work that appeared there in trying to make transitioning between regions seamless for the players.
So let's cut now to some recent gameplay. Obviously, we have come a long way since those early days.
Yeah.
I know a priority for the team has always been to design a fun game first, right? Like design a fun game, let the rest come after. But as our creative director, you have had to think a lot about the what comes after part. I'm wondering how the experience has been for you to integrate Web3 since it's such a new technology.
I think from the beginning, my foundational idea for the design of the game was that Web3 was something that was like an added thing and not like the central part of the experience, right? Like I think a lot of Web3 games try to, I don't know, inject Web3 into everything that the game has to offer, right? And I had like this belief, and we shared this with product ownership, that what makes Web3 very interesting is the idea of ownership, like of digital ownership. And so what we wanted was a game where everything that you find in game that's interesting, it's something that somebody crafted, somebody left an imprint on, right? Like we almost wanted items to have signatures, and like that would justify and explain why the Web3 aspect was important, right? Like you can see games like, I don't know, Counter-Strike, where it has like a secondary market for knives and skins, right? And it's like, how can we integrate that into the game, make it part of the experience, and have like a much more like self-sustaining loop, right? Because like in the ideal world, like that would allow us to provide items for the community, and that internal trade market would help us produce more things and stuff, right? And also, and I think this is very important, we wanted a game that could bring people over from Web 2, right? Like players from the Web 2 space are very, very reticent to trying Web3 games. And so we wanted a game that you could play at like in its entirety without accessing to the Web3 aspect. But then eventually you would realize, okay, there's this added things that I can do, right? Like I can integrate myself into the community more if I become part of that. Mm-hmm. And I think that was fundamental, right? Like creating a game that could invite a Web2 audience and not force them into having to access Web3. Because like,
I think the cool thing about Web3 is that it's honest about a secondary market that already exists in Web 2.
Exactly. Yeah. It's there, right? Like it's not, but like, I don't know. I love Magic the Gathering, but I think Magic the Gathering has a real hard time in terms of like Wizards of the Coast developing a product where, because the secondary market is so big, right? But Wizards of the Coast has no real access to that secondary market, right? It's something that happens over there in the distance. They have to create new cards and create new cards that are very valuable so that people can like speculate on that, right? So that's already happening in Web 2, right? Like, that's not even web, that's like a physical card game, right? So it's like, how can we integrate that thing that is happening so that like it nourishes the production of the game? And so like that's our ideal end game vision for the game.
Yeah, best of both worlds. I think that you did a really good job of
Yeah.
that. So I tip my hat to you, creative director. That was no small feat.
Thank you.
I've dug up some concept art now that I hope to show you, Tanilo. I am wondering if you can tell us, what is the process like? Do you go to our artists and say, give me this, make it creative and beautiful, or do they come to you with designs and then you go, oh yeah, I know how to put this into the gameplay?
So generally how it works, for example, these that you're showing is the Hedge Wizard encampment, right? So we wanted like a set of wizards that were color neutral, right? Like the 7 colors are fundamental in our vision of the game, of like progression and everything. But we wanted a space at the beginning that was like non-aligned, right? And so what we decided to do, how we always work, is we take a reference, like an architectural reference from the real world, and then the game design and the narrative design teams get together and are like, okay, what can we create here, right? What's unique? For example, if you look at that concept that just passed, that's the Blue City. So for the Blue City, we clearly have Greece in mind, but like, how do we inject some technology to it, right? Because with the world in the Runiverse coming from the singularity, there's like a deep set connection to the real world. So we wanted things that felt like, okay, these are evolutions of things that we have seen in the human world up to this point. And then after that, we gave like, I don't know, like, it's almost like a brief page with like, okay, these are the key features, maybe architectural, right, in terms of color palettes, etc. And then we let the artists propose like their interpretation of that brief.
Okay.
And then it becomes a back and forth, because like there's a lot of stages, right? Because then first it's a concept, but then it's transitioning that concept into pixel art. And it happens a lot where you realize, okay, this is beautiful in the concept, but it has so many textures, so many colors, that rendering in pixel art is not that easy. But I think in general, our artists have done a great job in like keeping the spirit of what was in the concept, to like an incredible degree.
Yeah, I totally agree. When I saw those concept art pieces, like even the shrubs that are animal shaped and then happening upon them in the 8-bit designs in game,
yeah,
I found that so charming.
And something that's very nice, like we have like a weekly meeting with the art team where it's concept artists and all of the artists in the team, they give feedback to themselves, right? Like I'm there also providing feedback, and also the art director is providing feedback, but like that internal flow of like giving feedback, talking, giving your opinion out, right? I think it's very important to build like a team, especially when there's a lot of remote work. I think building a team is fundamental.
Yeah, that's its own challenge that I'll have to get into in another episode. We just don't have time today, but
it's fine.
Your national team, we're entirely online. It's crazy. Now let's talk about combat, shall we? I think that you had such a unique challenge here because you took the Forgotten Runes Wizards cult established lore and rules about magic and then had to turn it into a game's combat system. And that just has its own challenges, right? Like balancing, planning for future updates, but you also wanted to be true to the lore that the Forgotten Runes Wizards cult knows. So how did you approach that challenge?
I think as you're sharing there, like our fundamental thing, again, I bring Magic the Gathering because I think it's a design masterpiece in terms of
totally
of like the balance of like the different elements. And so we started by creating like this color wheel, right? Like as Magic has this color wheel and how different colors interact. And like that was the basis of saying like, okay, the red wizards have like these, let us call like virtues and flaws, right? How can we play around those virtues and those flaws to create like a distinct personality to their abilities, right? But we also wanted players to not be pigeonholed into, okay, I'm the red wizard, it's like fire, and its power, and so its physical DPS, right? We also wanted to explore giving players who wanted to be a red wizard the capacity to have a red wizard that heals and a red wizard that tanks, right? And then the question is, how can we use those virtues? For example, you see there it's ambition and virtue, right? Like, how can we make a healer out of that? And so interesting discussions came about until we eventually decided, okay, it's a healer that heals you through money, right? Through the power of like investment. And it's like an abstract way, but like I think it ends up giving even tanks and DPS and like unique personalities, right? So if I see a DPS that's like red versus a DPS that's blue, both can be a physical DPS, but the way that they feel is very different, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's very important, right? It's like I think the flavor of things is fundamental, and so injecting like all that flavor that the 7 colors have, right? Like the idea that yellows are time mages and party and like the souls of the party, right? Okay, how do we make a tank that is the soul of the party, right? Like, and a healer, right? So it's like a healer that plays music, right? Like the DJ. And other games have done that, right? Like if you look at Lucio in Overwatch is basically, he's healing through the power of music, right? And
right.
so
Sona and League of Legends, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and so it's like the fun thing that we have is like the lore of the 7 colors is very rich, and because the community keeps adding, right, we'll eventually be able to say like, oh, right, like this nice idea that the community had, let's turn it into a specialization. And I think that's something that's super fun.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well, I only have one more question for you, Tanilo, and it's more about that team element again. You were talking about how important that is, and well, you've been with us for 3 years, so I'm wondering if you just have any fun stories you can share with me, a newcomer, like even if it's a crazy visual bug you guys all laughed about or anything else.
I think of things that you discover are more valuable than you imagine, right? I'm thinking, especially you have it there, the light bulb frog, like the story of the light bulb frog is like, we were like thinking of this event, and it was like, okay, we need a collectible, what can we come up with, right? And it was like a frog and a light bulb, right? Like, and it was like, oh, it's just gonna be like this small thing that we need for the event, and it ended up being like such an iconic thing, right? Like Carlitos, the artist who did it, he made like this awesome design, and it ended up being like, okay, this is very big and super nice, right? And it's like, okay, how do we reuse it now, right? But it didn't stem from like, okay, we're gonna do something that they're gonna love or whatever, right? It's like, we need a collectible, it's a creature, it's animated, and then boom, you got the light bulb frog. And I think that's, I think, and it became like the image of the game, right? Like you can see it in the stream and everything.
Yeah, it's fully become a thing. So that's part of just team discussions, tackling issues in like game design.
And also, I know I'm sidetracking a little bit, but
no.
When we did that event, the frog hunt, and we started to see like art pieces done by the community with the light bulb frog, we knew like, okay, this is like something that can be meaningful to people, right? And I think that's super valuable.
Yeah, well, he certainly is.
Yeah.
Hey, can't think of a better note to end on than the light bulb frog. Thank you so much for coming here, Tanilo, and chatting with me. I've learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to learning more as we continue to work together.
I am as well. And as the chat always says, banana.
Banana.
Sorry. It's because that work calls.
No, it's okay. I know I'm stealing your time. You're in high demand, Tanilo. Don't worry. I know.